Julia stood at the kitchen window, watching Doha play with their daughter in the backyard. The morning sun painted everything gold, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe that this was all there had ever been. A husband, a child, a home filled with laughter instead of whispers. But what she didn't know was that her perfect life was about to shatter. Memory has teeth, and hers bit down hard when she least expected it. She remembered the first time she saw him transform. The way his skin had rippled like water disturbed by wind. The way his eyes had glowed with something ancient and hungry. She remembered running until her lungs burned, remembered the cold terror that had lived in her bones for months afterward. And now here he was, pushing their daughter on a swing he'd built himself, his laughter bright and human and utterly ordinary. Too ordinary? Something whispered in the back of her mind. "Mommy, look!" Her daughter's voice cut through her thoughts. "Daddy says I can touch the sky." Julia forced a smile and waved. The child was 3 now, with her father's striking features and her mother's cautious eyes. They named her Grace, because that's what Doha said he'd been given when Julia let him back into their lives. Grace, un deserved favor, a second chance at everything. But Julia had started noticing things. Small things at first. The way Doha would sometimes stand too still, like a predator deciding whether to strike. The way his eyes would track movement with an intensity that didn't quite match his gentle smile. The way he never, ever forgot anything, no matter how trivial. And these signs were only the beginning of something far more terrifying. "Your coffee is ready," her mother said from behind her. Julia turned. Her mother had moved in 6 months ago, officially to help with Grace, but Julia knew the truth. Her parents were watching, waiting, making sure that the creature who'd once been a python wouldn't suddenly remember what he'd given up. "He's good with her," her mother continued, joining Julia at the window. "I'll give him that." But Julia knew there was always a but with her mother. "But nothing is free, my daughter. Not in this world, and especially not in the world he came from." Her mother's voice was soft, almost sad. The elders told him he would forget. They told him he would be fully human. But what if forgetting isn't the same as erasing? Julia's hands tightened around her coffee mug. "He's been human for 3 years, Mama. 3 years without a single incident. He works like a man. He bleeds like a man. He gets sick like a man. What more proof do you need?" "I need time," her mother said simply. "Lots of it. Enough time to bury whatever he used to be so deep that it can never claw its way back up." Outside, Doha caught Grace as she jumped from the swing, spinning her around until her delighted squeals filled the air. Julia watched them and felt her heart crack open with love and terror in equal measure. This was the life she'd always wanted, the family she'd dreamed of during all those lonely nights when she thought she'd never see him again. But dreams, she was learning, always come with a price. The business meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, and Julia dressed carefully. The real estate company they'd built together had grown faster than either of them had anticipated. What started as a single property had multiplied into a portfolio that stretched across 3 cities. Doha had a gift for knowing which investments would flourish, which neighborhoods would bloom, which buildings held potential that others couldn't see. "Too good at it," her father had muttered once. No man should be that lucky. But Julia pushed those thoughts aside as she checked her reflection. She was no longer the frightened girl who'd fled into the night. She was a businesswoman, a mother, a wife. She had rebuilt herself brick by brick, and she refused to let old fears demolish what she'd constructed. Doha appeared in the doorway, wearing the navy suit she'd bought him for his birthday. He looked every inch the successful entrepreneur, his hair perfectly styled, his smile warm and genuine. "You look beautiful," he said, and she felt that familiar flutter in her chest. "You're biased," she replied, but she was smiling. He crossed the room and kissed her forehead. "Ready to make some people very impressed with our proposal?" They drove to the meeting together, talking about Grace's upcoming birthday party, about the new property they were considering, about mundane, beautiful things that filled their days. Julia tried to relax into the normalcy of it all. but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were living on borrowed time. The meeting went perfectly, too perfectly. Doha charmed the investors, answered every concern, painted such a vivid picture of their future success that the contracts were signed before Julia had even finished her presentation. As they walked back to the car, she felt proud and unsettled in equal measure. "How do you do that?" she asked as Doha opened her door. "Do what?" "Make people trust you so completely. Make them want to give you everything you ask for." Doha paused, his hand on the car door, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face. Something old, something that remembered forests and moonlight and power that didn't need words to command obedience. Then it was gone, and he was smiling again. "I'm just honest with them, Julia. I tell them the truth about what we can build together. That's all." But Julia had seen it. That flicker, that shadow. And as they drove home, she couldn't stop wondering what other pieces of his past still lived inside him, waiting for the right moment to surface. That night, Julia couldn't sleep. She lay beside Doha, listening to his steady breathing, and tried to quiet the storm in her mind. Everything had changed so fast. One moment she'd been alone, raising their child without him, and the next he'd appeared on her doorstep, claiming he'd given up everything to be human. But what did that really mean? She slipped out of bed carefully, padding down the hall to Grace's room. Her daughter slept peacefully, clutching the stuffed elephant Doha had bought her. In the moonlight, filtering through the curtains, Grace looked angelic, innocent, untouched by the complicated truth of her origins. "She's perfect, isn't she?" Julia jumped. Doha stood in the doorway, his form backlit by the hall light. "You scared me," Julia whispered. He entered the room quietly, standing beside her to look down at their sleeping child. "I heard you get up. Thought you might need company." "Can't sleep," Julia admitted. "Too much on my mind." "Want to talk about it?" Did she? Could she tell him about the doubts that crept through her thoughts like smoke? About how she sometimes looked at him and saw two different people occupying the same space? About how she loved him desperately but didn't fully trust him? "Do you ever miss it?" she asked instead. "Your old life." Doha was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, thoughtful. "I don't remember enough to miss it. Sometimes I get these feelings like déjà vu but stranger. I'll see something in the forest or smell rain, and for just a second I'll feel like I should remember something important, but then it's gone. Does that scare you? Should it?" Julia turned to look at him in the dim light. His face was all shadows and angles, and she couldn't read his expression. "I don't know, Doha. You gave up everything you were. Your power, your immortality, your nature itself. That's either the most romantic gesture in the world or the most terrifying." "Why terrifying?" "Because I don't know what happens if you start to regret it." Doha reached out and took her hand. His skin was warm, his pulse steady and human against her palm. "I won't regret it, Julia. How could I? I have you. I have Grace. I have a life that means something. Whatever I was before doesn't matter. This is what I chose." But choosing and keeping, Julia knew, were two different things. The nightmare started 3 weeks later. Julia would wake to find Doha sitting up in bed, his eyes open but unseeing, his body rigid with tension. He never screamed or thrashed, which somehow made it worse. He would just sit there, perfectly still, staring at something she couldn't see. The first time it happened, she'd shaken him awake, terrified. He'd blinked slowly, confusion giving way to recognition, and then he'd smiled that gentle smile and pulled her close. "Bad dream," he murmured. "Sorry I woke you." But it kept happening. 2 nights a week, then 3, then almost every night. And each time, it took him a little longer to come back to himself. Julia started researching. She read everything she could find about transformation, about spirits who became human, about the cost of crossing between worlds. Most of it was folklore, stories passed down through generations. But certain themes appeared again and again. The forgetting was never complete. The past was never truly erased. And magic, once it had lived in your bones, never fully left. "You need to talk to him," her mother said one morning after Doha had left for a construction site inspection. "These dreams aren't normal." What am I supposed to say? Are you turning back into a python? Her mother's face was grave. If that's what's happening, then yes. Before it's too late to do anything about it. But when Doha came home that evening, covered in dust and grinning about the progress they'd made on their newest project, Julia couldn't bring herself to shatter the moment. He looked so proud, so human, so happy. How could she poison that with suspicion and fear? Instead, she kissed him and listened to him talk about foundation problems and contractor negotiations, and she pretended everything was fine. Grace's 4th birthday party was a grand affair. They'd rented out an entire park, hired entertainers, invited what seemed like half the city. Julia watched Doha move through the crowd, charming parents and delighting children with his easy manner and infectious enthusiasm. This was the life they'd built. Success, stability, a daughter who knew nothing but love and laughter. Why couldn't she just accept it? Why did she keep looking for cracks in the foundation? He's wonderful with her. Julia turned to find Margaret, one of the other mothers from Grace's preschool. The woman had been trying to befriend Julia for months, clearly curious about the mysterious couple who'd appeared seemingly out of nowhere and immediately began buying up half the real estate in town. Julia agreed carefully. How long have you two been together? A few years. Julia kept her answer vague. The full truth was impossible to explain. Oh, we met when he was a supernatural being who lived in the forest. He got me pregnant, disappeared, then showed up 3 years later claiming he'd become human so we could be a family. You know, the usual love story. Margaret laughed. You're so private. It's refreshing, actually. Most people can't wait to tell you their entire life story. She paused, watching Doha lift Grace onto his shoulders. He just seems too good to be true, you know? Like he walked out a fairy tale. Julia's blood ran cold. What do you mean? Oh, nothing bad. Just that he's so attentive, so successful, so devoted. You hardly ever see that anymore. Margaret smiled. You're lucky. Lucky. That word again. People kept using it, kept saying how fortunate Julia was, and each time she heard it, she wanted to scream. Luck implied chance, randomness, the universe's casual favor. But nothing about her relationship with Doha had been lucky. It had been chosen, negotiated, paid for with currency she still didn't fully understand. Yes, Julia said finally. I'm very lucky. She watched Doha play with her daughter, watched him laugh and run and pretend to be a dragon that Grace had to defeat with her magic sword. He looked so real, so present, so undeniably alive. But Julia had learned that the most dangerous illusions were the ones you wanted to believe. That night, after Grace had fallen asleep surrounded by birthday presents and Doha had cleaned up the last of the party debris, they sat together on the back porch. The night was warm, filled with the sound of crickets and distant traffic. Thank you, Doha said softly. For today, for all of this, for giving me a family. Julia leaned against him, breathing in his scent, memorizing the feel of his heartbeat against her cheek. Do you ever wonder if we're tempting fate? What do you mean? Being this happy. It feels like we're daring the universe to take it away. Doha wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Then let's try. I'll fight anything that threatens this. I gave up everything else. Julia, this is all I have. This is all I want. And Julia believed him. That was the terrifying part. She believed every word he said, and she still couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of a cliff and the ground beneath their feet was starting to crumble. The first real sign came 2 months later. Julia awoke in the middle of the night to find Doha's side of the bed empty. She lay there for a moment, listening, and heard nothing. The house was silent except for the usual nighttime creaks and whispers. She got up and checked Grace's room first. Her daughter slept soundly, undisturbed. Then she went downstairs, expecting to find Doha getting water or working on some late-night business proposal. But the kitchen was dark. The living room was empty. She checked the study, the bathroom, every room in the house. Doha was gone. Panic rose in her throat. She ran to the back door and found it unlocked. Outside, the backyard was illuminated by a full moon, casting everything in silver light. And there, at the far edge of the property, standing perfectly still and facing the tree line, was her husband. Doha, Julia called softly. He didn't respond. He just stood there, motionless, staring at the forest beyond their fence. Julia approached slowly, her bare feet cold on the dew-wet grass. Doha, what are you doing out here? When she got close enough to see his face, her breath caught. His eyes were open but glazed, unseeing. His lips moved soundlessly, forming words in a language she didn't recognize. And his skin, in the moonlight, looked different. Not quite human, not quite right. She touched his arm gently. Doha, please come back inside. He blinked once, twice. Then his eyes focused on her face, and the strange quality drained away. He looked confused, disoriented. Julia? What? He looked around, seeming to realize where he was for the first time. Why are we outside? You don't remember? Her voice shook. Doha rubbed his face tiredly. I was sleeping. I was dreaming about water. Deep water and voices calling me home. He looked at her, suddenly frightened. I was sleeping, Julia. I swear I was asleep. But his feet were muddy, and there were leaves in his hair. And when Julia looked toward the tree line, she could have sworn she saw something moving in the shadows. Something large and serpentine, watching them with ancient, patient eyes. She took Doha's hand and pulled it back toward the house. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them wanted to name what they both just realized. The forgetting was breaking down, and whatever Doha had been before was starting to remember. Julia didn't sleep for the rest of that night. She lay beside Doha, watching the rise and fall of his chest, studying his face in the darkness as if she could read the truth written in the lines around his eyes. He slept peacefully now, his breathing deep and even, completely unaware of the terror coiling itself around her heart. When dawn finally broke, painting their bedroom in shades of gray and gold, Julia slipped out of bed and went downstairs. Her mother was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the methodical precision of someone who needed routine to keep chaos at bay. You look terrible, her mother said without preamble. I feel worse. Julia collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table, suddenly exhausted despite not having slept. It happened again last night. Worse this time. Her mother's hands stilled on the knife she'd been using to slice fruit. How much worse? He was outside, at the edge of the property, staring at the forest, speaking in a language I've never heard. Julia's voice cracked, and Mama, his skin looked different. His eyes looked different. He was there, but he wasn't there. The knife clattered onto the cutting board. Her mother pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, her face suddenly older, wearier. How long did it last? A few minutes. Maybe longer. I don't know. When he came back to himself, he didn't remember any of it. He thought he'd been dreaming. And was he? Julia met her mother's eyes. No, his feet were covered in mud. There were leaves in his hair. He'd been walking, maybe for a long time. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of understanding pressing down on them both. Finally, her mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We need to find someone who knows about these things. Someone who can tell us what's happening and how to stop it. Who? Who would even believe us? Her mother stood and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where just hours ago Doha had stood like a stranger in his own body. There's a woman who lives about 3 hours from here, up in the mountains. Your grandmother told me about her once. She's supposed to understand things that exist between worlds. A witch. Julia's voice was flat, skeptical. A wise woman. A seer. Whatever you want to call her. Her mother turned back to face her. We don't have many options, Julia. Either we find someone who can help, or we wait to see what happens next. And I don't think you want to wait. Julia thought about Grace, still sleeping upstairs, innocent and trusting. She thought about the life they'd built, the family they'd become. She thought about Doha's smile, his laughter, the way he held their daughter like she was made of sunlight and promises. No, she said finally. I don't want to wait. Doha woke to find Julia already dressed, moving around the bedroom with unusual energy. He stretched, feeling the pleasant ache of good sleep in his muscles, and smiled at her. You're up early, he observed. Couldn't sleep much. She didn't turn to look at him, too focused on gathering clothes from the closet. I'm taking Grace to visit some family friends today, up in the mountains. We might stay overnight. Something in her tone made Doha sit up fully. Everything okay? Fine. Just, Julia finally faced him, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. We haven't had much mother-daughter time lately. Thought it would be good for us. Doha studied her face, sensing something unsaid hovering between them. But he'd learned over the years not to push when Julia withdrew. She would come to him when she was ready. That sounds nice, he said carefully. Want me to come with you? No. The word came out too sharp, too fast. Julia softened her voice. I mean, you have that meeting with the contractors tomorrow and the property inspection. We'll be fine. Just 2 days. Okay. Doha stood and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. She stiffened for just a moment before melting against him. Julia, if something's wrong, you can tell me. She pulled back slightly, searching his face. Do you remember anything from last night? Last night, Doha frowned, reaching back through his memory. I slept. Had some strange dreams about water, I think. What? Julia's expression shifted, becoming unreadable. No reason. Just curious about your dreams. But Doha could feel the lie in the space between them. He could taste her fear, though he didn't understand its source. Something had happened, something she wasn't telling him, and the not knowing made his chest tight with anxiety. I love you, he said, because it was the only truth he was completely certain of. I love you too, Julia replied. That's why I'm doing this. Doing what? But she'd already pulled away, returning to her packing. Nothing. I'll call you when we get there. The drive into the mountains took longer than Julia's mother had estimated. The roads grew narrower and steeper, winding through forests so dense that sunlight barely penetrated the canopy. Grace chattered happily in the back seat, excited by the adventure, oblivious to the tension radiating from the 2 women in front. Are we almost there? Grace asked for the 10th time. Soon, baby, Julia assured her, though she had no idea if that was true. They'd been driving for nearly 4 hours when her mother finally pointed to a barely visible path branching off from the main road. There, that's the turn. The path was more suggestion than actual road, rutted and overgrown, forcing Julia to drive slowly. Trees pressed in on both sides, their branches scraping against the car windows like skeletal fingers. Grace pressed her face against the glass, fascinated by the wild darkness surrounding them. It's like a fairy tale, she breathed. Julia's hands tightened on the steering wheel. That's exactly what she was afraid of. After another 20 minutes of careful navigation, they emerged into a clearing. In the center stood a small house, more cabin than proper dwelling, with smoke curling from a stone chimney. The building looked ancient, as if it had grown from the forest itself, rather than been built by human hands. Wait here, Julia's mother said, opening her door. Let me make sure she'll see us. Julia watched her mother approach the house, noting the protective symbols carved into the doorframe, the dried herbs hanging from the eaves, the way the shadows seemed to move differently here, more deliberately. This wasn't just a house. It was a threshold, a place where normal rules didn't quite apply. Grace tugged on her sleeve. Mommy, I'm hungry. I know, sweetheart. We'll eat soon, I promise. The door to the cabin opened, and a woman emerged. She was ageless, her face simultaneously young and ancient, her eyes sharp and knowing. She spoke briefly with Julia's mother, then nodded and gestured for them to enter. Come on, Julia said, unbuckling her seatbelt. Let's go meet Mommy's friend. The inside of the cabin was larger than it should have been, the walls lined with shelves holding jars of herbs, dried flowers, stones, and things Julia couldn't identify. The air smelled of sage and something sweeter, more medicinal. A fire crackled in the hearth despite the warm day outside. The woman knelt down to Grace's level, studying her with those ancient eyes. Hello, little one. What's your name? Grace, her daughter replied, suddenly shy. A beautiful name. Do you know what it means? Grace shook her head. It means a gift you didn't earn, but received anyway. A blessing. The woman stood and finally looked at Julia. Your daughter carries 2 worlds inside her. human and other. The blood remembers, even when the mind forgets. Julia felt her knees go weak. You can see that. I can see many things. Sit. Tell me why you've come. They sat around a rough wooden table while Grace explored the cabin under her grandmother's watchful eye. Julia told the story from the beginning, leaving nothing out. The woman listened without interrupting, her expression unchanging, as if tales of python spirits becoming human were as common as recipes for bread. When Julia finished, the woman was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. The transformation he underwent is called the Great Giving. It's rare, incredibly difficult, and almost never successful. The fact that he survived it at all is remarkable. She poured tea into 3 cups, the liquid dark and aromatic. But there's a reason it's so rare. The price isn't paid all at once. It's paid over time. What does that mean? Julia's voice shook. It means he gave up his nature, but his nature didn't give him up. It's still there, sleeping deep inside him. And like all sleeping things, eventually it will wake. Julia's mother leaned forward. Can it be stopped? The woman's eyes were sad. That's the wrong question. What you should ask is, do you want it to be stopped? Of course we do. Julia nearly shouted, then lowered her voice, conscious of Grace playing nearby. We want him to stay human. We want our family to be safe. Safe. The woman tasted the word like it was foreign. There's a difference between safe and whole. Right now, your husband is being torn in two. Part of him desperately wants to remain human, to stay with you and your child. But another part, older and deeper, is calling him back to what he was. This conflict will eventually destroy him. So what do? The woman sipped her tea. You have 3 choices. First, you could do nothing. Let nature take its course. He will likely transform back eventually. And when he does, he won't remember you or your child or the life you built together. He'll return to the forest, and you'll be alone. Julia felt tears burning her eyes. Second choice, you could try to bind him more firmly to his human form. There are rituals, sacrifices that can strengthen his connection to this world. But they're dangerous, and they'll require his full participation. He'll have to choose humanity over and over again, every day for the rest of his life. It's a battle he may eventually lose. And the third choice. The woman set down her cup. You help him integrate both natures. Let him be what he is, human and other, without forcing him to choose one or the other. Accept him completely, transformation and all. Julia laughed, the sound bitter. Accept him turning into a python? Watch my daughter's father become a monster? Is that what he is to you? A monster? The question hit Julia like a physical blow. She thought about Doha holding Grace, teaching her to ride a bike, making breakfast on Sunday mornings, kissing Julia's forehead before she fell asleep. She thought about his gentleness, his patience, the way he looked at their daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. No, she whispered. He's not a monster. Then stop treating his true nature like one. The woman's voice was firm, but not unkind. He loved you enough to give up everything he was. Can you love him enough to accept everything he is? Julia had no answer. Her mind spun with the impossibility of what was being asked. How could she explain to Grace? If you enjoyed this story from Storysphere, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next tale. Thank you for watching Storysphere.